I study global warming and sea level rise using data from NASA satellites, along with data from a wide variety of other things that go out and actually measure the temperature and salinity of the oceans.
Fantastic. I guess often when people think of climate change, they think of atmospheric warming, but if you were to tell the story of climate change from the oceans, how does that go?
Well, it turns out that actually, if you tell the story of climate change without the oceans, you're missing a huge part of the signal. 80 to 90% of the extra heat that we trap from greenhouse gases winds up warming the oceans. So if you're looking for global warming, you really have to look in the oceans to see it.
Okay. And how much of a delay is there? There's an inertia period, isn't it, between the heating of the atmosphere and when it sinks to the oceans?
That's absolutely right. Actually, the way it works is the ocean sets the time scale for global warming. As we trap extra heat, we warm the oceans. The oceans then, in turn, warm the air. And the air is what eventually restores our planet in radiative balance, they call it. So that's when the energy coming into the planet equals the energy going back out. So we will eventually achieve a new balance, but at the price of having a warmer planet, a warmer atmosphere, a warmer ocean, and higher sea level.
Okay, this is sounding fun. So, first of all, what inspired you to become a scientist?
Well, I loved science ever since I was a little kid. I've really enjoyed physics and math. I know I sound like a big nerd, and I am a big nerd, but I really love it. And so I went to graduate school. I worked on a PhD in physics for a little while, but that didn't really agree with me. And in the end, I found oceanography, and oceanography really opened my eyes to doing science that's important to people here and now, today. And that's what I really love about studying the climate, is that it's one of the major issues of our time, and I get to make a little contribution to understanding it.
And Josh, for Australians, 85% of Australians live within 50 kilometers of the oceans, and it's an island continent with magnificent seas and everything else. What are some of the things that are concerning you about, the coming decades, given your research findings?
Absolutely. Well, the ocean is definitely warming, and one of the biggest places it's warming is in the southern hemisphere. You have to remember that most of the ocean is in the southern hemisphere, just like the biggest chunk of the land on the planet is in the northern hemisphere. When we heat up the oceans, they have a big impact on the climate. And actually, a lot of that heat is going in the southern hemisphere. So really, Australians are going to begin to feel the brunt of climate change due to warming oceans before a lot of other places are. So we really have to look at how these warmer oceans impact things like rainfall and how they change the climate. But of course, the big issue for me is sea level rise.
Right.
I'm an oceanographer, and so I think of global warming often in terms of global sea level rise. Essentially, every time we add a centimeter to the global sea level, that's a centimeter that we're not going to get back, at least not in our lifetimes. Global sea level rise is basically an irreversible process on the time scale for humans to make a difference about it. So as we look from space at the global sea level rise, we can see a very steady, very clear picture of how humans are changing the climate.
Now, I'm going to stop you here because I can't tell you how many people approach me and say, I go to that beach every year. I've been going for 40 years. It hasn't changed diddly squat. So, how come you can see it so clearly from space?
Well, one of the reasons is because we can do the average over the whole world. When we look from satellites, we can see once every 10 days what the sea level is doing everywhere on the planet, or almost everywhere. And this gives us a really good measure of how the whole volume of the ocean is changing. Now, this doesn't necessarily translate to your beach disappearing, because when you get down to the local level, there's a lot of other things going on. In some places, the land is rising. In other places, it's sinking. And actually, a lot of our beaches that we go to all the time are managed. Here in Southern California, for instance, we rebuild the beaches. We replenish them. We add sand as they disappear.
We do that in Australia as well.
And so, it may not be immediately visible to you, but as global sea level rise accelerates, and as we get faster and faster rates of rising seas, it'll be harder and harder to replenish those beaches, and more land is going to be reclaimed by the oceans.